Let's look at that a little bit broadly now. Campaign promises claiming to be solutions to problems. Do they matter more than the leader who makes the promises, or does the leader matter more than the promises that are being made? What are your thoughts? 072-110-5584. Drop us an X at Newzroom 405. We're joined now by political analyst Dr Levy Ndou. Good to have you, Doc, and thank you very much for coming on this evening. Do policy commitments matter in terms of the campaign trail and the campaign promises that are being made? Or is the electorate just merely looking at the leader that's making the promises?
Good evening, Tavo. Good evening to the viewers at home. Well, I think it depends on the kind of constituency that is listening or receiving the message. You have got instances where some members of society would listen attentively to what political parties are saying, and that has a potential to influence the vote of those people, because what they do is that they will look at the manifestos or the policies of other political parties, and that will therefore influence their vote. In another instance, you have got a group of people who would only follow certain individuals or leaders on the basis of their charisma, on the basis of how they actually articulate or talk to these masses, and therefore these people could therefore follow such leaders. Some people would vote for parties and political leaders because they are influenced by other people, and that's why we talk about political socialization. They could be influenced by members of their families, they could be influenced by their friends, and therefore they could therefore follow or support certain political parties and leaders. And each time when people vote, such is actually looked at. But at the same time, there's another important component that we need to look at, that there are certain people who don't need to be convinced to vote for certain political parties because already they've taken decisions for which party to support. Even if they go to the rallies and activities of other political parties, such individuals have their own political preferences and they will constantly vote for such parties.
Yeah. Having then campaign promises or promising particular policies, knowing very well you have no capacity to implement them, is that not a deterrent to the electorate? Does the electorate not look at you and say, but even if you do go in, you'll go in there with 2 seats, or you'll be a 1.5% party if you're lucky? So saying you're going to go in and completely annihilate Roman Dutch law, it's not possible. It's not a possibility.
Indeed. That is another deterrent that we need to look at. It's a possibility of a huge deterrent. Some of the people, when they go to attend rallies and political activities, you would hear them say, let's go and listen to the jokes in this rally, because the leader that will be speaking in that activity will be making a lot of jokes. Some people would say, we have listened to political party A speak, and they say they are going to do the following. And you'd hear this citizen saying, we know that such is not going to be possible. And that has a potential not to attract voters towards such political parties. There are also people who would be very much attentive and at the same time take whatever political leaders are saying, and that also has a potential to influence voters to vote for such political parties. So there are benefits and disadvantages in making such kinds of statements. But what is very, very important in the election season is that political parties study the kind of people that they are going to talk to, and based on the study that they've conducted, they speak the language that these people could be able to accommodate or accept, and on the basis of the kind of constituency that you talk to, you actually make promises that you know that kind of constituency would easily be able to accept.
So if we then listen a little bit closely to the MK party campaign promises as delivered by former President Jacob Zuma. I mean, just from the two that we are listening to now, and I'm sure there are a lot of others, there's a lot that is telling in what is guiding that thinking and what would be the policies of the party. For example, the question that the former president raised is that he was arrested by a democratic government. Many people have said part of the reason why former President Jacob Zuma doesn't get along with President Cyril Ramaphosa is precisely that he actually was arrested in a democratic society where the president was Cyril Ramaphosa.
Indeed, it is quite interesting that former President Zuma talk about the change of the laws in South Africa, moving away from the Dutch laws and coming up with the African laws. Some people would say he is correct because even though I don't speak with a lot of authority on legal matters, some people will say there has been a lot of influence of the South African law by other laws from other countries. And I would recall that whilst I was still at the university, some of the students who were studying law would actually be studying something called Latin, and you'd hear them practicing these Latin words. But at the same time, other people would say, former President Zuma on this matter, even though he's campaigning, he could be someone who is directly conflicted because we know his history that he does have issues with the laws in South Africa or with the courts in South Africa. At the same time, it would be important to note that whether it is a Dutch law or whether it is an African law or whatever laws that we need to change, there are certain basics that the laws would actually say you should not do. For an example, whether it's African or any other law, they would say it is wrong, for an example, to kill. They would say it is wrong, for an example, to steal. They would also make many references. So even though we talk about the transformation of the judiciary and changing of the laws, there are certain basics that regulates human interaction that whether you are in Africa or in Australia, such would actually be found not to be correct. And indeed, whether you are an African or whatever, such would actually be punishable by the law. At the same time, certain laws that are there, which are social, requires a lot of people to come together and agree on what is supposed to be wrong and what is supposed to be right. And of course, that will require a lengthy process to do, because in a democratic system, when you have to make laws, you need to be very much inclusive, and the majority of citizens should actually agree with you.
How important is the track record of the one making a campaign promise? At the time of making a campaign promise, especially in this instance, someone who has been in power, someone who has been a president before for at least 2 terms, and they say, well, look, I stopped load shedding and I'll stop it again. And how important at that point to say, can we interrogate the track record and whether the track record supports what you're saying?
It actually depends on what I indicated earlier on, that politicians would study the constituency that they are supposed to interact with, and they know the kind of courts that they are supposed to press when they are talking to this kind of a constituency. Obviously, someone who might be watching from a distance would actually be saying, indeed, you have been the president or you have been in government since 1994. You should have participated in changing the laws. Indeed, you have been in power for quite some time. You can start identifying challenges right now. But based on the constituency and the following, which is quite specific, that former President Jacob Zuma has, those are the kind of courts that is supposed to press. And indeed, he is actually doing the right thing, because that is the message that you need to translate to that kind of a constituency. And if it works for him, he is not going to stop, because what becomes primary now is to ensure that he galvanizes as much support as possible towards his party, the Umkhonto weSizwe party.
Dr. Levy Ndou, appreciate your time. Thanks so much for coming on there tonight and helping us in that conversation.